cybernetic organism, living tissue over metal endoskeleton.
Radio Free Infinite, episode 364. It's another one of those great
Finish the fight
type of episodes.
Sir, finishing this Big Mac.
Because we finally hit Kraftwerk Part 3, covering the latter stages of their career up to the present. And I, for one, am actually pretty excited about this episode because I get to drop two pretty hot takes on you. But what isn't a hot take is my assessment of the 8th Kraftwerk album, their first one of the 80s, Computer World. Because if you ask me, this is definitely one of their best. If you ask most people that listen to Kraftwerk, they're going to tell you this is one of the albums to get from them. I'd say that the 3-album run of Trans-Europe Express to Man Machine to Computer World is pretty much the peak of this band. And Computer World might just be the crowning jewel in the discography. Certainly one of their most influential albums. And it even starts out with a Kraftwerk take on what I might call the intro chug riff. Because, you know, you got stuff like Unleashed, or Bolt Thrower, or even farther back into the 80s with Slayer. All the way back into the 70s with the probable genesis of this sort of construction, at least in a heavy metal context, that being Black Sabbath's Children of the Grave. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, that sort of chugga-chugga choo-choo train, locomotive anticipation building type shit. It's probably a construction that even goes back farther than heavy metal. I mean, you had Gustav Holst rocking out to the... And that was back in 1917. Before that, you had like Wagner, Beethoven, all kinds of people doing that sort of thing. Well, guess what, losers? Kraftwerk's got their own fancy version of it, and their own inimitable robot style, and it's how they chose to start this album off. Move over, Bolt Thrower, there's a new sheriff in town, and they got their own chug riffs. In many ways, this is kind of the most hard-edged and percussive of all the Kraftwerk albums, and it makes for an interesting contrast with the rather gossamer, spindly sense of melody going on here. Speaking of contrast, sort of an interesting thing going on lyrically with this song, because sonically it sounds rather positive and happy, if a bit dogmatic and mechanistic, but the lyrics are just lists of government agencies and aspects of life that technology has total control over, and it's all kind of overseen by this eye in the sky sort of melody. Very simple do-do-do-do, sort of floating threateningly over everything, perhaps even directing the rest of the instrumental components from above, some panopticon shit. Maybe that's just my interpretation of the song.
You hear me? I'm not insane!
As I mentioned earlier, this, in many aspects, is kind of the heaviest, or at least the sharpest sounding Kraftwerk album, particularly on a song like Numbers, which was very influential, especially in regards to its percussion. I mean, if all music is math in some sense, there's no clearer demonstration of that concept than this particular song. I mean, the beginning of the song is just this ghostly voice counting to 8 in German, and they even managed to introduce a little bit of counterpoint to that by having another slightly different synthesized voice counting more slowly over top of it. And then that beat hits you. I mean, come on, dude, it's the Numbers beat. You can blame Karl Bartos for that one. Then the ghost voices come back. And they're doing this weird thing where they're mixing up numbers from different languages, kind of weaving their way around that core beat in a very suspenseful manner. It's the pinnacle of Kraftwerk's explorations into musique concrète. Highly experimental, and it would be very strange if it wasn't so darn catchy, thanks to, again, that number beat, which is as influential for electronic music and hip-hop as the D beat was for punk and metal. But lest we get too far into the percussive weeds, Kraftwerk then follows all that cacophony up with a very cosmic, sparkling re-rendition of the main melody from the Computer World opener. Kind of sounds like the cosmic doorbell of the machine god. And the reintroduction of this theme really shows off in microcosm Kraftwerk's ability to reassure their listeners after heavier and darker moments. They can always bounce back with something a little bit lighter sounding. The lightest and kind of peppiest track on this album gotta be Pocket Calculator.
You must pick up a new pocket instrument by pressing down a special key that plays a little melody.
I mean, this one's just got a delightfully peppy main melody to it. And they're also very clever with how they add new layers to that melody. With these kind of sliding, synthesized horn sounds that eventually take us into the verse, which is intensely percussive, but not in the same sort of dogmatic way that Numbers was. It's a lot more fun and lighthearted. I also really like their usage of sound effects. Then we jump back into the vocals, and gosh darn it, wouldn't you fucking know it? There's a very sly reintroduction of those slippery melodies from prior to the vocal-led section of the song, all building up to the epic climax, wherein they have an even greater utilization of sound effects. They're just really good at using non-musical elements in a way that becomes very musical. Not only is this pretty much the forerunner of the modern incarnation of what we might call sampling, but it also kind of puts them in contrast to how classical music developed, even though Kraftwerk themselves are incredibly influenced by classical music. When you look at how modern classical music developed over the course of the 20th century, they were using all this instrumentation that's always been regarded as very musical and just getting more and more dissonant and strange through utilization of odd concepts like tone rows and whatnot. Meanwhile, Kraftwerk is taking these incredibly non-musical, sort of just weird sounds and making them into very tuneful, melodic constructions that have a lot more in common with how orchestral music used to be. When you juxtapose all that with the starkly technological, futuristic vibe they got going, it makes for a very unique take on what music can be, and it definitely helps explain why Kraftwerk are so influential. Getting back to the darker aspects of this album, its closing track, It's More Fun to Compute, is another really almost threatening sounding song. Very heavy, at least in the Kraftwerk version of being heavy. You got this robotic voice of an evil god telling you, and you get the feeling they're going to make you agree with that whether you like it or not. And then this weird expansive section makes its advent known. These weird little semi-melodic blips kind of orbiting and swooping around the central pulse. Then you get this ghostly melody kind of emerging from all of the percussive din. And it really does have a very haunting feeling to it. It's like a darker counterpoint to that very positive sounding melody that formed the backbone of the opening Computer World track. It's like the sound of the human spirit attempting to reassert itself over all of this seemingly soulless technology, bringing itself back into existence in a new form. Again, maybe this sounds a little bit pretentious, but I don't know, something about this Kraftwerk album in particular really gets my brain's gears grinding. It makes you think, okay, this is smart people music.
Me Grimlock, no bozo!
And now we come up to the first hot take of two hot takes I've got on this episode concerning the follow-up Kraftwerk album, that being 1986's Electric Cafe or Technopop. Depending on what version you get, it's titled differently. A lot of people say that this really is Kraftwerk going kind of downhill. They say it's their worst album by a fair margin. I disagree. I actually think this album is super fucking cool and is a really nice sort of follow-up to that colder, sharper direction they were going in on Computer World. I don't really get what the problem is here. Maybe it's just because it took longer to come out. It was supposed to come out in 1982 or so, like right after Computer World, but Ralph got in a cycling accident and it ended up delaying things quite a bit. We'll get more into his whole thing with cycling later in the episode, but for now, I mean, you hearing that clean fucking beat? How can you be into Kraftwerk and not enjoy that?
Music non-stop. Techno pop.
Perhaps the issue here is the synthesizers might sound a bit more dated to modern ears. Paradoxically, these were actually some of the most advanced synthesizers available at the time. But for some reason, the synths from the 70s seem to have a less retro feel to them. Maybe it's just because the human ear isn't as accustomed to hearing them, and also it's 80s pop music. But yeah, we definitely got more of that musique concrète shit going on here. Utilization of non-musical sound effects in a very musical sounding way.
Music non-stop. Techno pop.
Check these vocals out.
La música ideas portará.
Again, I don't know how you could be into Kraftwerk and hate this. Some of their catchiest, most unique sounding shit ever. Maybe the problem was it's just, it's 1985 now. People have gotten way more accustomed to hearing all this electronic music, so Kraftwerk doesn't sound as fresh and new as it did back in the 70s due to oversaturation of the airwaves with all the synth music, but that's not really Kraftwerk's fault. And it's not all just like happy, peppy pop music either. They definitely expand on some of the darker aspects, the more mechanistic aspects of the Computer Underworld album in a very interesting way. I mean, damn dude, that drum beat's heavy as fuck. But check out the melody they choose to marry it to. Just the combination of this super hard drum beat with this very icy, delicate, cold sort of melody is really fucking doing it for me. This song also goes all wacky with the samples in a very entertaining sort of way.
Dial again.
Just getting real crazy fucking around with that whole phone concept. This song's the second of 2 phone concept songs on the album, and it's by far my favorite. And it gets even weirder once the vocal samples go away and you just get these like synth washes fighting each other for space over these like super loud, cacophonous, percussive arrangements. Something of a high point in their discography for me, this song in particular. And it's a damn shame that a lot more people don't appreciate this album for the genius work that it is. The final track on the album, again, depending on which version of it you bought, the title track, Electric Cafe, might be the most gothic sounding Kraftwerk song ever put out. Weird fucking intro, almost sounds more like something you'd hear on a Klaus Schulze album than Kraftwerk's usual tunefulness. Then you get into the song proper. You have this, again, very haunting sort of melody being played very delicately. And then this heavy fucker hits you. Like, bro, that's some fucking Metroid shit. That shit's fucking dark. Then they hit you with this very halting, stop-start sort of danceable section with some very haunting vocals. And then we move to the song's third act.
Wow, man, freaked out!
Like that just weird unfolding of noise. It's fucking great. It's everything vintage Kraftwerk should be. And if you're a fucking Kraftwerk fan and you whine about this album, you're just acting like a fucking baby.
Baby want a bottle? A big dirt bottle?
Unfortunately, technopop did not catch on the way that it should have, and we entered something of a dark age for Kraftwerk. They put out sort of a rearrangement remix compilation type thing entitled The Mix in 1991 that isn't really that relevant to the overall Kraftwerk canon, if you ask me. And from there, we didn't get a new full-length Kraftwerk album until 2003, which is where Jub's hot take numero dos comes in. Because in 2003, they graced us with the Tour de France soundtracks. And I gotta say, as far as comeback albums go, this is it. This is the gold standard. All right, it's up there with Beherit's Engram, if we're talking black metal. Probably the best comeback album of all time. Certainly not your standard, we're back sort of nonsense. And if you're into Kraftwerk or just electronic music in general, just music in general at all, and you've given this album a skip, holy fuck are you missing out. Because this is absolutely vintage Kraftwerk in one of the best ways it's ever been done. And it actually all stems from a single they recorded in 1983, also entitled Tour de France. They've lovingly remade it on this album as the closing track. Now, I know the intro with the breathing might sound a little strange, maybe a little gay, but it makes sense for the cycling concept. Then those synth melodies hit you. And it's just absolutely classic Kraftwerk. I love the weird synthesized bass going on here, and just like the multi-layered constant melodies going on. It's like Europe Endless and Autobahn all over again, but maybe even a little bit better, depending on which day of the week you ask me. And you know, if you're making an Autobahn style song, you gotta have a killer vocal hook.
Crevaison sur les pavés, Tour de France, le vélo vite réparé, Tour de France, Tour de France.
And as expected, of course, Kraftwerk fucking nailed it with this one. One of their catchiest, most earwormy choruses ever. I mean, it's like they never left. What a fucking single to come back on. The 83 version is great. The 2003 version is even better, bringing in that much heavier, harder edge from the techno-pop era and marrying it to the pastoralism of their earlier work. But that's not all we got going on in this album. They didn't just remake one song from the 80s and do a really good job with it. No, they used that song as an entire jumping off point for a concept album about cycling. See, I told you we were going to get back to that shit. And if you think about it, the bicycle may be the most perfect expression of the Kraftwerk ideal, because it essentially turns the human body into a machine in order to do work that neither the human body or the inanimate object could do on their own. It's literally a machine powered by the human soul.
I craved for strength and certainty of steel. I aspired to the purity of the blessed machine.
This full length starts out with 3 similarly titled pieces, Tour de France, Étape 1, 2, and 3, Tour de France Stage 1, 2, and 3, which are sort of a deconstruction and an expansion of where that 1983 single was going. Part 1 starts out with this really cool usage of percussion to mimic the sound of a bike chain. And again, you get these really cool ghostly melodies kind of existing over the simulation of bike sound effects via the percussive elements. Also really like the energy of that sequencer melody. Then part 2. You get this really cool, like, aquatic wash of synth noise that then unfurls into this absolutely get the blood pumping at the gym sort of build-up section. In terms of programmatic music and this album's concept, I believe this section is supposed to simulate going up and down hills on a bike, because you get these climbing sections at the top of the hill, and then these much smoother sort of descending sections as you go back down the hill, which leads us into part 3. Which starts off with this very furtive, sort of popcorny kind of melody. The way I interpret this part is, now that we've gotten our bike going, we've gotten used to pedaling, going up and down hills, now we're just kind of looking around, seeing all the cool shit that you can only really see from a bicycle as opposed to driving somewhere in a car. Because you're really more part of the environment than being separate from it. Just, I don't know, it's a really cool way to write music. And
the benefits don't stop there.
because when you get to side B of the album, they go even deeper on the sort of man-machine Kraftwerk concept they've been running with since the 70s. In this case, looking at human biological processes, the sort of thing that go into making you capable of riding a bicycle, being described in very machine-oriented terms. Biological machines, you know? Like you got a song called Vitamin. And I feel like if protein synthesis and adenosine triphosphate reuptake could sing, they'd probably be singing a song that goes a little something like this. It's just, what a unique song. It feels cold and mechanical while also somehow feeling biological and lively. Just a super interesting method of portraying these very scientific, cold concepts in a warm, organic sort of way. Similarly, you have the song Electrocardiogram. It's percussive core based around the human heartbeat. We also have the reintroduction of the breath motif from that original Tour de France song. And if you really pay attention over the course of this album, you realize that all of these songs relate back to that initial 1983 song in some way or another. It's a very Baroque sort of album, you know, themes and variations. And because this is sort of the ultimate Kraftwerk album, they revisit concepts from all over their career. Like you could definitely hear the DNA of songs like Numbers in the way that this song utilizes these vocal samples, in conjunction with a very minimalist melodic skeleton. Sort of a modern take on stuff they were doing back in the 80s. That's what makes it a great comeback album, is it's got hints of their earlier work, but it does new and interesting things with all of it. I mean, you gotta like Electrocardiogram. This is just a classic fucking Kraftwerk song. And the last new song before they go back into that amazing reimagining of the original Tour de France single, Regeneration, is a great culmination of the whole biological machine concept. This one's very dreamy and ambient, but it's also very succinct. Definitely a perfect way to regenerate after that workout. It's somewhat bittersweet because this is pretty much confirmed to be the last Kraftwerk album, particularly now that Florian Schneider's passed on. But what a way to go out, dude. How many other musical groups can you think out there that the last album they ever put out was one of their best and was such an effective capstone to their entire career? Kraftwerk, even if you're a black metal person, a gore grind person, you only listen to slam death, I gotta feel like if you like music at all, you gotta have some appreciation for these guys. Hopefully I managed to convince you of that over the past month or so, but if I didn't, thanks for listening or watching or whatever the fuck you did, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.
Fuck you, bitch.